sums up the statistics that I put together. I'm happy to answer questions or maybe or whatever the commission desires.
Any questions for Greg? Dick?
You're talking about processing facilities.
Yeah,
We don't, Act 250 does not regulate logging.
correct. That's correct.
Over 25 feet.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's the same jurisdictional thresholds as farming. Above 2,500 feet in most instances, Act 250 would be triggered for mining operation.
Generally, logging is forest and forest. You do have regulations.
Well, I think there are best management practices that need to be complied with, and I think we do that.
There are acceptable management practices that have to be complied with.
And that's the jurisdiction of
It's
FDR.
still not mandatory.
They're mandatory on UPA land, and if there's a discharge, then they were supposed to be in place. I'm not. You probably have a better, as a good or better understanding.
They are not mandatory.
Mandatory on UVA, but not on other land.
Aaron?
Wondering if it would be possible to get those stats, and I may have walked in after you did the one from the earlier presentation in an email or by.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it along to you this afternoon.
I was going to submit them, but thank you for coming on that.
And I'm also wondering if you have, or maybe this is going to come up, any idea of the, you've talked about a handful of operations, and I'm trying to, it might help the commission to understand how much forest processing is out there. In other words,
Yeah.
how much is actually subject to Act 250?
So I think Sam?
Thank you. So, in terms of how much process is out there, I believe Vermont has about 19 sawmills that report to our department annually that saw over 1 million board feet annually. And as far as firewood producing operations or chipping operations, I don't think there's any data available on that. There's not a typical way that they report to the department. There's only one functioning pellet mill in the state of Vermont at this time. And then there are the other part of this too is the what are known in the industry as concentration yards, where locally, with the loss of sawmills, locally people will establish a log yard where someone can bring a host of diverse products harvested from the forest. They'll be sorted, aggregated, and made into full loads that will go to mills or exported or however around the region. So those are the types of traditional sawmill that you might be thinking of, a firewood producing operation, someone who's producing wood chips to supply to institutional operations, the concentration yards, facilities like that. But there is no, there's no known registry or anything like that, other than our data that the department collects every year from the sawmill production and things like that.
Thank you.
Is the sawmill production just voluntary or is there a requirement on the
That was just some data. The report that we gave you in December had a table in there of the sawmills in the state compared to the rest of the region. And we reported to you, I believe it was 19 over 1 million board feet. It is a voluntary effort that our department makes a request to understand what the trends are, where lumber is coming from, where it's being sourced from, where it's being sold, etc. If I may, I just wanted to also add to the comments from the NRB that we also solicited comments that have been coming in, the written comments from the forest economy to express their experiences, any issues, concerns, values, solutions, etc. I don't know the exact number of letters that I've seen come through. They're posted on your website. And they outline some descriptions of how these issues have limited their ability. In terms of, if I may expand a little bit, we were talking about my own experience. As many of you know, before I came to work for the department, I was a mechanized logging contractor. Typically, a logging contractor can work 180 days a year and produce wood in a responsible manner. That's 180 to 200 days you can have your machinery on the land when it's dry enough or frozen enough. And quite often, when it's dry enough or frozen enough, that's going to be nights, weekends, holidays, things like that. And we're seeing a shift in that. I can look back to the days that we produced over the years, and we know our winters are short. We know our summers are homes are built and people live near facilities that is either log yards or processing operations, that there are, there's been these trends of some permits, restrictions put on for when trucks can come in the yard. And that creates when the industry, the forest economy is working to be responsible and respond to the climate change conditions, and they get to the gate of the wood yard and they can't deliver their product, that sort of denotes a trend that we don't want to continue. We want to have these folks have access to markets. Another trend that we noted in the comments was the mitigation of prime agricultural soils. And again, as a lifelong farm owner myself and farmer, there's a few things I value more, and that the permitting of some of these facilities and the concept of prime ag soil mitigation, to some of them has been, they don't understand the logic is that these facilities add value to the commodities on the land, and are, as one of the commenters put it, that they see themselves as a land conservation tool in essence, as and enable a land use to exist. And to put it in other terms, if there's a market, if there's a bottling plant for organic dairy products that needs a certain amount of supply of organically produced milk, that's a certain type of land use that enables. And these facilities enable forest land to stay forest land through management plans, use value appraisal, and those things. And so the idea, some of them feel penalized that they have to mitigate prime agricultural soil, and it's noted in several of the letters. So that these various things that have been talked about, we just welcome the opportunity for a dialogue and discussion. We've lost a lot of markets in the region, and if the markets don't exist, the land use doesn't persist. We're 80% plus or minus forested. 85% of that is private landowners that need to many of them need an economic return. And with climate change and clean air, clean water, keeping these private landowners able to own and maintain and properly manage their land is a big part of the solution that we all see together. So I'll take a breath, and if you have any questions, if I can explain any of these things to you at all, or have a dialogue, I'm happy to do so.
Comments or questions? Aaron?
I could ask one, but, well, I was just wondering what's an example of mitigation of primary agricultural soils that has had to happen because of a forest processing operation. If you're so like if you have a concentration yard, somebody actually been stacking them on prime ag soils and have to mitigate. Are we talking about sawmills?
One of the examples I noted in the written comments was Sosimo Lumber. One of their subsidiaries is Green Mountain Mulch. They take the waste product from the mill and turn that into mulch for homeowners. And I don't remember the exact dollar figure, but they were required to pay 3 or 4 to 1 in a conservation fee for that.
I know the project, and they put it right on River Bottom Lane, River Bottom Lane on the main stem, and it had, in fact, been a very productive cornfield.
So this is a comment from Sir Sosimo.
But in fact, with the yard, the buildings, the parking, whatever, that all became impervious surface, and it was no longer an agricultural operation.
And I think one of the things is that, and again, as I said, I highly value the mitigation of prime agricultural soil, but we're asking, and of course there's a big dialogue that needs to occur around a proposal such as this, but to consider the facilities that are adding value to the undeveloped land uses of the state, to consider that in a way, whether it's an agricultural, I'm here to speak to forestry, but in order to add value locally, compete in the global economy, do all these things, if that facility is enabling land ownership, because that waste product, sawmill waste product, can be processed in state, value retained in state and added, that we consider that. So,
Do we have a sense of how many of those, is this the one example we have?
I don't have, you mean, with respect to climate ag,
Yeah.
we could probably come up with some, but it sounds like Sam might have more knowledge on the specific projects concerning ag mitigation than I have. I don't have any firsthand knowledge.
Right, I just would love to know.
Sure.
mine is gleaned from the comments. I think anybody that I've heard from in my work, you'll see in the comments that came in those written statements.
So is it one is one?
Yes.
Well,
I've heard the state is continually losing sawmills. Losing sawmills. More and more sawmills are going on. And it's in the state that's so heavily forested, it seems like a contradiction. In fact, I'm wondering if you could tell me, is there a certain rate, is that true?
I can't identify a trend line or a certain amount. I could easily submit that data. I could go back to the department with those reports that we were discussing earlier and get that data, trend line. And as I said, in our submission to you last December, there is a table in there that shows the number of sawmills in the region. And to give you an example, all of those 19 sawmills that I told you about, cumulatively they process 98 million board feet of saw logs a year. If you look at our 19 in Vermont, you go just across the border to Quebec, and there's well over 100, maybe 150 sawmills that report sawing over 1 million feet a year. My interviews and just my other work with some of these mills and trade things, there are individual mills on our border in Quebec that saw 150 million board feet a year. And all of our mills in Vermont only saw 98 million board feet. So there's huge capacity around us, away from us, the logs being exported out of Vermont. Much of our low-grade wood is exported out of Vermont. We're not adding value. We're losing that capacity. And I'd be happy to submit information to you about any trends or data that we can note over time with that.
Is there a perception in your industry that the reason that's occurring is because of activity?
I think there is. I think that's part of it. I think energy costs, labor. I think common manufacturing may have declined in the state, but many of the mills that don't exist have had an Act 250 related reason that they had issues with. There are mills that exist today that say they will not expand because they no longer want to open up their Act 250 permit, or they're not jurisdictional now, and they won't do it. Mills that could add kiln capacity to dry wood here, mills that can expand low-grade wood markets. People are nervous about it. I think 2 facilities right now, people that would like to open concentration yards, but they're concerned about hours of operation. When these logs have to be exported, they just can't control the entire trucking dynamic and the trucking network of the wood has to come off the land and be available when the ground is right, or when the trucks are available. So, but I'd be happy to submit information about any trends that we can note in specifically related to the law.
The Connecticut River Valley, you mentioned the mill capacity up in Canada and whatever. I saw a truck with logs on it headed south, and I turned around and followed it. It's just awesome. You mentioned 80% of the land base is forested. What's that in acres?
about 5 million.
5 million acres overall?
I'll defer to the chair.
6 million in the state, it's not quite 80.
Oh, yeah.
78, I think. Is that sound right?
Yeah. Well, because there are various figures about various things happening to forested acres and the number of acres. I just didn't know how many acres. Thank you.
I think the loggers are in trouble now that you're gonna have more time on your hands. You're already following the trucks.
There's 2 million acres enrolled in current use, 15,000 landowners.
Right.
And just to tell you one other trend that our department is working on in relation to this is, Representative Fay knows we were at the Orleans County Land Lab on Tuesday. Many of the high school technical career centers are seeing a major decline in the number of students entering natural resources programs, ag and forestry. We are 80%, or 78% forested, I think double digits in agricultural land. And with this decline in markets, with the decline in the number of students interested, with all of us in this room interested in seeing this land managed better than ever. We want to look at this in a comprehensive way and figure out how to maintain this land use in a responsible way. So, and part of that is another generation coming along, having confidence to come into these careers and invest, things like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of agriculture, I've been maintaining for years now, I'll just say it here, the business model for milk agriculture is broken. That brings me to, what has NAFTA done relative to trade in Canada? Why are our logs going north? And from what I have heard sitting on this side of the table, is in fact it's subsidies that are offered by the government to the sawmill operations and the logging operations. What has NAFTA done for slavery?
From what I understand, that the recent agreement that was made was only about a 2% change in the tariffs, and that does not potentially bode well for our markets for forest products. And as you know, as a traveler of I-91, there's logs from way down in Connecticut all driving through New England to go to Canada and to Quebec. As you said, they're subsidized. They value these industries to employ people and for their land use and things like that. And we would love to see an environment in Vermont where we could stop those trucks here and unload them and add value to those forest products here because of all the benefits that brings to land use and the rural economy. But again, another big impact is the trade with China. We're about to see a 10% tariff right now. It's looking to go to 25% tariff on logs going to Asia January 1. And this is really hurting our rural land base in this global, as you alluded to, the things that are playing out in another part of this country's government are really impacting our rural land use, and what does that mean long term, and why can't we want to be able to add value here. Let's do it here, make the products here, and because of the land use that enables.
Thanks.
Okay, we need to move on. We'll take one more real quick.
What changes would expedite more knowledge?
Maybe that's,
I think a signal from this commission, this legislature, the General Assembly, that we can address the common issues that are out there with these permits type of conditions. Maybe a deeper look at this, but a signal that would give mill owners the confidence to invest. It gives business owners the confidence to bring their children in for another generation, their daughters and sons, to become involved in building these careers.
Maybe a little bit more specific.
Chair asked me to be brief, so I want to be brief.
well, yeah, thank you. We are running behind.
Yes.
Excuse me, to the next,
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
While you're on a break, if I may, I was referring to a document this morning when I was using the name Capability Development Plan for. I know Beth Hunson's going to talk about this, but I just wanted to commission to have copies of the document I was referring to, which is it's a series of legislative findings from 1973, Section 7 of an act. And Section 6 of the Act refers to those findings of the Capability Development Plan. There's a lot more work, I think, that went into this issue before these were made. Really, the first one is going to talk about all of that. Just want to make sure. And so if there's a confusion about what I was referring to actually a plan or not, well, you'll see it's a series of legislative findings.
All right, thank you.
you for having me.
On short notice and being flexible, really appreciate it. It's incredibly timely to our process.
Thanks for having me.
Introduce yourself to the rest.
Yes, I'm Elizabeth Flintstone. I'm a urban planner from Chicago. Watching?
Watching.
Okay. I was asked to come and speak about the Vermont Land Capability and Development Plan, and I just wanted to briefly describe what it was, how it was used, and why I think it might be relevant to your discussions. And just for a little background on my role, I was a land use planner in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development from 1974 to 76. I'm aging myself. And used this plan at that time. I then moved to the State Planning Office and was a state planner from 76 to 78, again with responsibilities for implementation of the Capability and Development Plan. And then subsequent to that, I was a planning consultant and also, until it was repealed, had occasion to use it. So that's my involvement in it.
And I thought it was repealed.
I was afraid you might ask me that. Aaron, do you know when the legislative, it wasn't totally repealed.
The
Legislative findings were.
the legislative findings were not repealed.
Everything else.
The authority to do a land use plan was repealed. There was a statement that the legislative findings shall not be used as criteria. Wasn't adopted. That's my.
But you cannot find them in the Act today when you go just look at the statute. So I think they were taken out actually.
They are reprinted in the Green Book as, if you actually look in section 642, 6042. They are not criteria. They are an act of legislature that still stands. It was not actually repealed. My research is that they were not actually repealed.
In any event, I can speak to the fact that they are not used subsequent to that action.
And Madam Chair, may I ask just a little bit of, you tee this up a little bit better, how this person got here, and why invited, and what we're sort of going to
Oh, sure, sorry.
That's
I thought
okay.
this morning,
I'm sorry, I missed that piece.
well, how we all received from Sharon Murray, the findings that the BPA found for us, and I don't actually, were they recently put up on the webpage? The maps.
Yeah, I'll just briefly,
Yeah.
we knew that they were available from my history working with them in the past. We actually went through the state archives with staff from DHCD to recover them in the state planning office files and had them digitized to show that the maps did come in association with the plan. And basically asked Beth, because Beth has had experience using them, how they were used. So we offered, or Beth offered to present that to the commission today.
And so the map, did you, I didn't see any of them.
They're on the website of the reports for today.
They are.
Yep.
I also have some maps in my presentation, which is not very long.
Thank you.
So just a few facts about the Capability and Development Plan. In the legislation, the purpose of it was to build on the interim Land Capability and Development Plan, which you may have heard of. There were three plans: the interim, the Capability and Development Plan, and the State Land Use Plan that were referred to were in the original statute. So the interim Land Capability and Development Plan was completed. It was a series of maps. And so the Capability and Development Plan built on those maps, expanded those maps, and it was intended to serve as a guide for a state land use plan that was supposed to be subsequently adopted. It produced a set of maps by counties, which I will show. It included the legislative findings that Aaron has referred to, which were policy statements, and it also included the Criteria 9 subsections. Criteria 9 just said conformance with the Capability and Development Plan prior to the adoption of this plan, and we got all those sub-criteria at the time the Capability and Development Plan was completed and adopted So you have the legislative findings, as I understand it. This is the first page of them, what they look like. I wanted to refer to the purpose of the findings, which says to provide general and uniform policies on land use and development to municipal, regional, and state government agencies for their guidance and consideration, and to provide the basis for the Vermont land use plan to be adopted under section 6048 of Title 10. So that was the preface to those legislative policies that have been distributed. So the policies included all these categories. They're quite extensive. I'm not going to go into all of them right now, but you can see the categories. They basically were divided up into 3 sections: land use and economic development, resource use and conservation, and government facilities and public utilities. So I want to, and here, for your information, is an example of some of the maps that the Capability Development Plan produced. This is the map of limitations for development, and my eyesight's not very good, so there's steep slopes, shallow soils, unstable soils, floodplains, issues with subsurface sewage disposal. It was the kind of information that they had on this particular map. They're pretty generalized. The soil surveys weren't very detailed, and these were done in 1971. Since then, we've had detailed soil surveys for all of Vermont, I think, by now. I hope by now. So that was an example of one map. This is another map, capability for agriculture, forestry, and mineral extraction. Again, primary agricultural soils are of good capability for agriculture. I think is the way they worded it, forestry and so forth. Again, it was somewhat generalized due to the lack of specific soil surveys at the time. There were other maps as well. There was one generalized land use. So this is all Champion County, which summarized where the developed areas were. There was a composite map that took an overlay of all 4 of the maps. There was a unique and fragile areas map as well, with historic resources and other unique resources on it. But those were less legible, so I didn't include them. So how is this plan used? I can speak from my experience. I was, back in the day, there was something called the Act 250 Review Committee, which was made up of members of state agencies who got together, I think it was about once a week, and we reviewed the Act 250 applications and looked to see whether or not there were any comments on them. So I looked at the maps. I looked at these land capability maps and pulled out whether or not, oh, this is an historic resource, or this area is unstable soils for development, or, you know, I basically used those maps for doing my part of the review. There were other people from transportation, natural resources, agriculture, and so forth that were also involved in looking at this. And then we submitted comments that went to the District Environmental Commission from the state agencies on each of these applications. So that was one way in which they were used. I also, back when I was working in the Agency of Commerce, it was before regional planning commissions were really set up and really running with staff. And one of my jobs there was to review local plans, and the local plans were submitted to the state and to comment on them. And because these legislative policies were supposed to guide local plans, I reviewed the local plans to see how they met these local policies and wrote comments back to the town, contacted the Regional Planning Commission in some cases. So that was also how they were used. And often I was using those maps to point out things that maybe they had overlooked, like floodplain or unique resource or something in their local planning. And also use the legislative findings, those policies, to see if the plan really was complying with policies. And I have to say, I think in most cases, that was new for local planning commissions in Vermont in the 1970s, and they weren't. And they were just getting up to speed, and the regional planning commissions were just getting up to speed, so there wasn't a lot of compliance. was no downside for them. There was no punishment if they didn't do it. The third thing I wanted to mention was pretty interesting, I think, and it's something that's gone by the wayside, and that's Executive Order Number 2 on state public investments. That was issued by Governor Salmon, and I did get a copy of that. This was basically an instruction. Well, let me finish this, and then I'll get into that in a minute. I mentioned it was also the Criteria 9 subsections and capability development plan was for preparing for the state land use plan. So Executive Order Number 2, it basically, the Governor Salmon decided that these legislative policies by statute were supposed to guide state actions. And he issued this executive order that in order to comply with these, that it was the state was going to base planning for growth on a projection of reasonably expected population increase in economic growth, which recognizes limits to the state's human, financial, and natural resources. And he also said Vermont's investment in public facilities is instrumental in determining land use patterns, resource management opportunities, and private investment. And therefore, he authorized and directed state agencies and departments to examine their present policies and procedures concerning public capital investment. And each state agency worked with the then state planning office to come up with a way in which they were going to, through their public investment actions, comply with these legislative policies. It's a little bit like what Act 200 was intended to do. And this was implemented in the state planning office, and my job was to review the state capital investments proposed by individual agencies to see if they really did comply with these. So we had a lot of fun with transportation and A&R on sewer line extensions, water line extensions, and things like that. So there were a lot of issues. That pretty much, that practice went out when Salmon went out and Governor Snelling came in. It was discontinued at that time. But I just wanted you to be aware that did happen. So since, I guess Aaron and I have a little different understanding of history, and Aaron, you're probably correct because you're closer to it than I am, but my understanding was the section on the legislative findings had been repealed, and definitely it was removed that it could be used in Act 250 reviews. And I want to... So I just wanted to say why these were important in the reviews, and one case that I was able to recall was the Hawk Mountain case. Hawk Mountain was proposed in Pittsburgh and Stockbridge, a pretty big expansion in a pretty small community. And I was asked to look at this and to evaluate under Criteria 9 fiscal impact on the communities where it was going to go in. It was when I was a state planner. And so one of the policies is about seasonal homes, and it says that seasonal homes has a tendency to convert to year-round occupancy. And therefore, when you look at a seasonal home development proposal, you should consider that fact, that this could convert to year-round occupancy. That is not dealt with at all in the Criteria 9. I mean, you could figure out a way to make it dealt with under the term population growth under 9A, but it makes it clear in this policy that that is supposed to be considered. And so we use that in that hearing before the legislative, and that took place before these policies were no longer able to be used in an Act 250 proceeding. So that was one example I could think of as how we use them. Then we had the section on the state land use plan was appealed. Then we had Act 200 adopted, and that presented some revised goals in Chapter 117 for municipal and regional planning and state planning as well, and included, obviously, as you probably are well aware, the planning requirements for the state level, for the regional level, and for the local level. And then subsequent to that, we had downtowns, village centers, new town centers, growth centers, and neighborhood development area legislation adopted. in that legislation, we had also goals specified at the time the legislation was adopted, and smart growth principles were referenced in the goals and were also defined. So you have, even though we don't have these policies, we have those goals in Chapter 117 that are supposed to guide state, local, and regional planning, and we have language also just related to growth centers without smart growth principles. And the other thing I think that's happened that's important is that we have so much better mapping now. We had these paper maps back then. Now we have computerized mapping, so we can look at all these data layers and see how they interact with each other. The mapping is much better and more updated more regularly, so particularly at the regional level and through these EGI as well. So access to information, that kind of mapping information is much better now. But what I don't know, well, I'll get into that in a minute, but so we have most, but not all of the capability development plan policies. I didn't have the time to take a look at all the policies that have been adopted subsequent to this and see which ones are left out of the original set of legislative findings. But that is one thing. It might be worth checking to see if something has been overlooked. But we don't have those policies connected to Act 250 and to the administration of Act 250 and Act 250 and the carrying out of the Act 250 to help inform district commissions when they're making decisions about how these criteria should be considered and used. That connection's been dropped. We have the mapping. I don't know. I'm less involved in Act 250 in the last couple of years, but I don't know how much that. I know in one case I was involved in the Coochy Highlands case that definitely the mapping that was available was very good in that case. But I would hope it was being used regularly. I would hope district environmental commissions had access to some of this mapping that's available now. What we don't have, and I'm not sure how much this bears on your jurisdiction and what you're looking at, is we don't have any coordinated state review of Act 250 projects, to my knowledge. There's no Act 250 review committee, to my knowledge. I don't know that there's a mechanism for state agencies to coordinate their reviews. Under Governor Snelling, we had the Pyramid Wall proposal. That was a massive state agency coordination effort led by ANR and the State Planning Office to review all of the impacts that were going to affect the state of Vermont when Pyramid Wall was proposed in Williston in 1978. That is the last time I'm aware of that there was that major kind of agency coordination. It may have been something subsequent to that, but that was a very coordinated effort under Governor Snelling. We have some coordinated land use planning at the local and regional level. We don't have state agency planning. As far as I know, that's not being implemented. Enforcement of the appeals process of local and regional plans and their compliance with Act 200. There's no regional commission that was intended to be set up to do any kind of enforcement of that. So I'd say there's some big gaps in Act 200, so that there are aspects of state agency, particularly state agency work, that was being done at the time of the capability and development plan that is not being done now. We also had a state planning office that was responsible for preparing population economic projections that all of the state agencies were supposed to share and use it as a basis for their planning within their agencies. There was coordinated state capital investments, and there was coordinated planning going on. The state agency planners got together regularly. I don't know that that exists today. This is my perception of some of the things that have changed. Just so you see what land development, this is the 1971 Chittenden County existing land use. And this is from the Regional Planning Commission. This is 2016 developed land. So you can see how good a job we've been doing in meeting these state guidelines over the year. What I see a lot in this is a lot of scattered rural residential development, and a lot of strict commercial development as well, extending along Route 7, for example, going up to the north and heading down to the south. So those are just a few quick observations. I didn't have a whole lot of time to spend comparing them, but so that concludes what I wanted to present. I'm happy to answer questions.
David?
If I could, just in defense of Act 200, the parts that you noted are missing were in the bill as passed and signed.
Yes.
And since taken out.
They've been taken out?
Taken out.
When? And by what, I'm sorry, can you
I
tell
didn't
me?
know.
There's no state coordination.
Right.
There was a council that was set up to handle appeals between the state and local level. Local plans had to comply with regional plans. State plans had to comply with regional plans. All of that's gone. That was all part of the fabric of Act 200 when we passed it.
My understanding is local plans do have to be approved by regional planning commissions, and that has not changed. My understanding is that the law is still there, it's not being implemented.
Well, you know, however it is that you get around the tiger, if you get around, you're done. So, in fact, it's not being enforced. As you said earlier, even back in the early days of 250 and whatever, if it's not enforced, who cares?
Aaron?
Just to add some of the legal knowledge, first of all, Representative Dean, I think the conclusion that it's not, is, to my knowledge, correct. I mean, I agree with that. But that there are a few, some of those things do remain on the books. For example, there is still a statute about state agency planning, but it refers to agencies listed in an executive order, and that executive order is no longer in effect. So the Council on Regional Commissions, I'm not sure if it's still on the books, but it's not being funded. Maybe it's been repealed. Yes. Okay. And the current law on municipal plans says that they may be consistent with the goals of Act 200. In order to get confirmed by the Regional Planning Commission and be eligible to receive various carrots that exist, for example, municipal planning grants, then you have to, the Regional Planning Commission has to determine that the municipal plan is consistent with Act 200. So it's more of a carrot. It's not a stick.
Yeah, no, initially as structured, there was a fabric and there was threads that tied everything together, and you could pull on those threads if someone did not choose to cooperate, and you can't do that. That was all they had. It took less than 2 years.
Well, I think it's consistent with what happened in the 70s as well, with the failure to proceed to the next step of the state land use plan. There's always been this sort of fear or something, trepidation about taking that next step to see the state get its own act together, but yet the state expects municipalities and regional planning commissions to meet standards. I find it interesting that the state doesn't want to subject itself to some of these
And
standards.
just for that conversation, I think this is the statement of what the political winds were. This act is not intended, shall not be construed to limit in any way the freedom of any person to sell or otherwise dispose of his land, unless by doing so he will create a subdivision as defined in 6001, which is 250. So those were the winds that were blowing across 250 and Act 200.
Yeah, Aaron?
I do want to just make clear my understanding of the legal status of those findings from 1973. My understanding is that they were not actually repealed. Language was added quite some time ago, around the same time, that they will not be used as criteria in the Act. So that's not the same as actually repealing the findings. I believe they remain valid findings legally valid findings and policy statements of the legislature. There is a hesitation to use them in Act 250 proceedings because the law expressly says you can't use them as criteria. There are a handful of cases that I'm aware of that refer to them to interpret the criteria that you can use, and there are people who question whether you can even do that.
Maybe in my rush to get organized for this, I skipped it, but I went to this section of the law, the statute, and looked for it and couldn't find it. So I assumed it was taken out.
It's session law.
Oh, okay. But when you refer to it,
It's fine.
Well, they are actually reprinted in the Green Book somewhere around section 6041 or 42 after one of the sections is shown.
okay, I believe you.
I agree with you, it's not a statute, it's session law. And there is definitely restrictions on how they can be used.
Any other questions for Beth? Comments? Thank you, Dan. Very interesting and edifying.
Do you want this copy of Executive Order number 2?
Sure. Take 5, yeah.
So what is what
Okay, we will reconvene final afternoon session here. We do have some time on the agenda for advisor comments, if anyone wants to comment. Dan, would you like to join us?
Should I come up? Okay. Very brief today. Dan Dusher, Environmental Policy Manager with Vermont Agency of Transportation. I understand there's going to be another meeting on October 26th. We would love to come in and present V-Trans's perspective in a little more detail. You can make a little more time on that day. I'll try to get the Secretary and our Chief Engineer to come in and maybe someone else just to share some of their experiences. V-Trans is obviously one of the biggest landowners in the state and one of the biggest developers, and we've had a lot of experience with Act 250 and including a lot of frustration. I've submitted some comments before suggesting that the Commission consider some kind of special treatment for federal aid transportation projects in view of all the other regulations that we're subject to, and also considering the history that we have at Act 250 and really relatively little added value in some cases. There was a little today on recreational trails. V-Trans owns the rail trails in the state, which is an extensive network. And I don't know where this was in the statistics. And I don't have exact figures for you today, but the Memorial Valley Rail Trail consumed, it's my understanding, of somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million to try to get through Act 250. And that came right out of the federal earmark and could have gone into trail improvements. And the result was no changes whatsoever. And, we've had experiences like that where we've had it going through this process with actually very little added value. So if I could just bring some folks back, next time or some other time to try to give you a little detail on this, I'd really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
You may have followed some of the situations, I think they're not unique to Bennington County, but the storage of propane gas and fuel along rail. And that kind of storage is not subject to any kind of local zoning or Act 250. It's worth a conversation, I think, at this point, either here, there are other places to have it, but I'm interested, given the seriousness that it's posing to my constituents in terms of not only environmental, but health issue, certainly if ever there were to be any kind of crash or anything like that, I'd like to have that conversation here, so we might just give people a heads up that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I can tell you right now, the reason why Act 250 doesn't apply is because of preemption under the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act. And we went through a huge jurisdictional argument over the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail about that. Perhaps the distinction is that it's a trail and not an active railroad, which V-Trans view doesn't make any difference. But that's part of what chewed up so much time. But I think I can tell you the simple answer to your question is that both the agency and the railroad will take a position that Act 250 is preempted, and they're probably not going to want to talk about it beyond that. But
No, I know they don't have interest in talking about it, but I think it's worth talking about it if we were to go against the feds on this issue.
Well, I mean, it's federal law, so I don't
No, I understand.
know if you
We
can.
challenged federal law in this building many times.
All right. Well, we'll be ready for that
Thanks.
when I come back.
Shocked at the figure, what cost $1 million?
Well, Cindy Locke's here. I think.
I'm right here.
Is that about, how long were we wrapped up in
Do
it?
you want me to come up or just answer from here? VAST itself has spent $600,000 of snowmobile membership money on Act 250. Even though the railroad was exempt. We, during that time, still followed all the stormwater permitting and wetland permitting, which, by the way, is very separate from Act 250. We do that with our other trails as well. But we've always followed that. So we petitioned the Surface Transportation Board last year, or a year and a half ago, I guess. And then met with A&R and came to an agreement to still fall under the traditional jurisdiction of Act 250. Well, not really. We've moved it over somewhere else. But this project, I could go on about it. How about if I come back on the 26th?
Well, we are going to be setting our agenda for the 26th later, and actually, since you just spoke on, I thought, would you just for the record say who you are?
My name is Cindy Locke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers.
Thank you.
Yes, so you,
Take that as a request that you would like to come on.
Please, yes.
so if I understand you correctly, the expense was fighting jurisdiction, not complying.
Part of the
Complying didn't cost you money, it was fighting jurisdiction.
through the appeal process, it took 10 years, and yes, that is what it was, the lawyer, the fees for the lawyers during that time. This trail is 93 miles long and crosses 3 jurisdictions.
And consultants as well, so the fees really added up. And there are other situations like this. And, some of them Act 250 proponents might point to as sort of examples where Act 250 makes sense. But we found that the results of Act 250 actually could have been dealt with in prior permitting programs, which is another frustration. So we'll get through state and federal wetlands programs, get our permits in cooperation with A&R, and then we get to Act 250, and these issues come up all over again because people didn't get involved earlier, and things have to be undone, which just feels like double jeopardy. The Supreme Court of Vermont has said this is okay, but it's really hard to see how that's fair or efficient. And you're familiar with situations like the Double Diamond Crossover, where Act 250, among other permitting programs, has been used to really complicate essentially a public necessity type project. So we can give you more when we come back, but I know the agency would like to be heard about these things.
And you did testify last fall when we were getting background information. You're going to bring different information.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sharon.
Sharon Murray, Vermont Planners Association. I just wanted to first say that I'm sorry for the delay in getting our spring conference report out, but it is coming out this coming week. It's basically represents what the findings were from the conference and not anything specific to BPA. There were a number of sponsors for that. And so we're hoping that that's useful for your work going forward, along with all the other input you're getting. I also just wanted to say that we have had our own working groups on Active 50 all summer. We are getting prepared to present some, I don't even call them recommendations, but some options for your consideration. And I was just wondering, in terms of the timing and in terms of the format, how can we be most helpful to you in terms of the input that we're going to be providing?
Well, we haven't talked about it as a commission yet, but we are next up on our agenda, we're going to talk about our process and what we'll do at the next meeting. And it's looking like a number of advisors are going to be weighing in next meeting, and would you be able to do that?
If I'm here, there's a conference over in Maine that day that I'm supposed to be at, but I mean, we'll definitely submit some.
Your submission would be it.
Yeah, we could join for that, yes. And I'm also open if you have any other questions that come up regarding maps or some of the historical stuff, or if there's holes you need to fill, we're happy to serve with the resource for that.
Great, thank you. Brian, you want to come up?
I don't know that I need to come up. I just wanted to with regard to your next meeting, we would also like to present some, so I guess I'd say the same thing that Sharon did. However, we feel it's helpful, we'd like to present some options or recommendations. We might actually couch those recommendations. Also, I'd add to that we recently completed the third in a series of research projects on forest fragmentation and land fragmentation in the state. And since that came up as a topic today with regard to the forest policies, I'm wondering if we had thought we would wrap some of that information into that presentation. We might make it two-part if you have the time for it, to go into a little bit of detail about the development patterns that are happening in the state, how we documented them, and what some of the causes might be, if you'd like to hear that.
Great, thank you. Any other comments from advisors? We'll move on then to what's next in our plan.
Well, thank you, sir.
back to the 2 weeks from that would be Friday the 2nd, that's the 4. All right. How
Yeah,
about
Friday the 2nd works for me.
It's just crazy for me to be here before they.
Yeah, that's honking.
Yeah, really.
That's honking wave.
all right, 9th?
It's good time.
I'll be away.
Okay. Yeah.
Fridays in general, I don't know if they're good, but I could do, when's Thanksgiving, is it 29th or is it 22nd?
Does the 8th not work?
Well, we can try the 8th. The 8th works for me.
Maybe if you choose to sober up.
Yeah, like, that's going to teach me stuff, but really, my Wednesdays and Fridays are the best for me in general. It's work except the 9. Maybe we should do a doodle poll? Or do you want to just try to find one meeting right now?
We were asked to try to get this done. Yeah, I'm going to go with the doodle poll.
I know this is crazy, but is that out of the question to do a Saturday? People?
I can't make it Saturday.
No, no.
I can do a second.
I guess I can do a Saturday.
Chris can do a Saturday.
In Bennington?
They close Bennington on Saturday.
Okay.
Paul, you can't do Saturdays. I can't. Okay. We'll send out another doodle poll. All right. And we'll skip this fool's errand. The work plan coming up. For me, it would help us if the next meeting, which we actually do is scheduled October 26th, I have a request from V-Trans. The Natural Resources Board has asked for time. The DNRC would like to present, and the planners will be presenting. What are folks thinking about where we are in the process and what we need to do on October 26th?
I'd like to discuss climate change.
Well, we have people slated to come, right? A few people. We're going to, I'm going to guess other advisors will follow up between now and then, that we'll want to talk. And then it strikes me that we need to really hash out what is going into our report. We have such, the report seems like a really huge task to me, and I don't think we need to do much beyond starting to.
Will we use the Aaron's outline for as the agenda for the conversation?
Well, it's a template, so it's something to work from.
I think, Aaron, do you?
No, that's what I'm asking. Do we want to spend time figuring out what we want to work from, or is this it? I mean, we haven't had that discussion. I'm perfectly comfortable using it as a place to start.
Yeah, I think that my thinking was that we'll use it as a place to start. I mean, Aaron has been with us in the collection of all the background information that we have, and I've asked him to start drafting those background that's going to need to go into the substantive, who's surprised, the substance of the sections.
Hang on. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I understand what I read as the draft.
Well, the sort of the findings under each of the sections, we've taken testimony and gathered information on them, and the sort of the factual information on them.
I need more information. I don't know what you want
Well,
to find.
for instance, the description of our, if we, it sounds like everybody's okay starting out with that. Maybe that's the question. But then huge chunks of that are just regurgitory, right? Like 2017 actual result, number 47. That's done.
Sections 2 and 3, I certainly would have a good idea of what to start writing, if that's what you're asking. The various tasks, I would need direction.
Right. So maybe that's what we start getting through.
Well, and I'll just use this as an example, I'm not sure that we've had any discussion, can't remember any testimony on release from jurisdiction. We know it's an issue, we know that it exists, but so when I say use this as a template, this is, we want witnesses on it, whatever, I think.
Would it make sense for us to dive through it and highlight exactly that? Okay, we need to hear some witnesses. In other words, dispense with the things that we can and set up the following meeting where we would try to have witnesses to make sure we, understand as you said.
Right, I think that jurisdiction over tracks, the time we spent today, I think gives us enough of a background for a legitimate conversation and decision. But there are some things here that we
Exemptions comes back.
yeah, and exemptions. So, okay.
So you're proposing, Chris, that we would do that at the next meeting? Go through it?
Well, I guess I'm hearing David.
Well, is it climate change?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, we get to your agenda item.
But I mean, some of these, if we're digging through, some of these, we have what we need. We have to then make decisions or craft our recommendation. Some of them we're going to say, oh smokes, we need to hear from more people. And so that, to me, would be a way to proceed, where we cross off sections that pretty straightforward, or we summarize some of the findings from our public process, or what have you.
And do you want to do that now?
No.
Next meeting?
I think so, yes.
So I guess this is the chairs, or the chair and the vice chair. I'm wondering, is it possible to make sense between now and the 26th for the commissioners, I don't know if there are any legal ramifications, to have a phone meeting, just to go through a little bit of this, talk about witness ideas, see where we're feeling weak, where we're feeling strong. Maybe we can even assign I have a list of areas that I think we all have a little list of areas that we're particularly looking at personally, and then we also have a broader. So I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe in a week, just go through this, say, hey, this is who we're going to need. This is who we don't need. This is where I'm good. This is so. I don't know if that's something that we could do. To me, it just feels better meeting in some way between this now and the 26th.
I think that's great.
We could.
Thank you for that. I agree. So then we're going to have homework, go through this, and see if there's something you're particularly interested in, and make sure that if we have it, if we haven't taken testimony and gathered information, bring it to this phone meeting.
Or highlight it at the.
Right.
Highlight it, and then that lets us set the agenda earlier.
We want Aaron on that phone call.
Are we getting Paul's final report by the October 26th meeting?
Yeah, that's actually due Monday.
So we have that in front of us.
So we have that as well. I mean, all the time we put in there, you have to fold that in. I haven't gone through it yet.
So then maybe the 26th meeting could even have some of the testimony.
Yeah.
Yes, what I'm thinking.
If we are, yeah, all right.
Yes.
There's something I'd like to explore, and I'm not sure exactly what the mechanics would be, how we do it, but I would like to see a comparison, if it's possible to put it together, of how long it takes applicants to fail to avoid jurisdiction, and how long it then takes to actually get a permit. My suspicion is it takes a lot longer to try to avoid jurisdiction than it does to simply apply. Similarly, I'd be curious about how expensive it is to mount a failing effort to avoid jurisdiction and how much it actually costs to comply. I suspect it's more expensive to avoid. And that then speaks to the issue about education. get it very strong. I hear from a lot of citizens who think they're aggrieved about how Act 250 is bad for business because people are afraid. And people don't invest because they're afraid that they'll have to go through Act 250. And I think that's perhaps a fear that says it's not really necessary. And the proof that it is necessary is how much it costs to try to avoid jurisdiction. So I don't know how we would do that, but what?
I said I don't either.
Well, the time, I think, you should be able to tell us that.
I can't tell you how long it takes somebody to avoid jurisdiction.
No. Well, you have records of when they filed an application.
Yes, but that's when they're filing an application because they want a permit, not because they're trying to avoid it.
Okay, when they ask for a jurisdictional opinion.
So you want to measure from when they ask for a JO to when? To when they apply?
To when they finally apply.
I really think, I mean, you can tell that, but I would be very cautious about trying to interpret that as people were getting a jurisdictional opinion so they could try to avoid Act 250, and then they decide to do their permit. I don't know that you have a basis to make that determination.
So we have some of the numbers available, I think, that you're looking for. The first part of the equation is how long does the JO process take when it's with the district, when it's with the coordinator. And we don't have that information. We could probably get it, but that time frame is relatively short. Generally speaking, requests for opinions and the opinions are turned around relatively quickly, maybe on the order of 15 days to a month. But the second part of the equation is how long are the appeals taking at the court. And that information, I believe we provided to you maybe last week. We provided a spreadsheet that looks at those at that very question.
I just sprung this on, so let's think about how you might do this. Right?
Well, you certainly have the second part of it, and we're happy to look at it a little bit more in depth.
I know from particular cases, and I don't know how representative they are, but I've had over the years any number of times where someone has come in and just said, it took me 3 years to get my Act 250. And I went, no, it took 2.5 years to fail to avoid jurisdiction.
The first part was the jurisdictional question.
Yeah, but that's a handful of cases. I'm curious as to how representative they are.
I would suggest what's more representative is people spending a lot of time to avoid getting denied a permit. So people file, and their application doesn't meet the criteria. So they spend a lot of time revising their project to meet the criteria. So that's in my experience what takes the time, is that they filed a permit, our agency, others say this isn't going to cut it, then they're redesigning. And that's often what takes the most time.
So the suggestion has been made at this table here that we just go through the draft outline for the report now and call out the things that we feel we may have enough information on. And actually, it's great because there's more of us in the room to remind us what we've already taken testimony on and received information on. So I think it's a good idea. We have time now. Well, let's just start with task 1. Successful or unsuccessful in meeting the goals of the capability and development. We already have some confusion on that.
And the findings that accompany Act 250.
Right, and I think we have enough information on that. I think that the discussion, in other words, can be held about whether we institute them, do we give them the status that they started off, give them back the status they started off with.
The question isn't, that's a different question from this question. That is a question that was on your list, but the question here is success of the program. The findings went from 1970. The findings here in this list are the findings from 1970. in the plan is those findings from 1973. And they form goal statements. And the question for you is an evaluation of whether Act 250 has, or the degree to which Act 250 has and has not been successful in achieving those goal statements.
How would we do that?
We need a BLS engine.
Just drop hold among our knowledge. I mean, we're not going to come up with a hugely declarative answer, right? The answer's going to be somewhat successful, I would guess.
It could be quite contentious.
What is it actually
Well,
possible?
would it be amongst us?
Yeah.
I mean, the six of us. Well, and I'm asking Paul, are you thinking about, would it be contentious going to the full body as a...
No, I mean, amongst ourselves, that's what we think is whether or not it met its goals. I think it'd be, I think it would be hard to come up with a consensus. So. And I think if we're going to make, if legislation is going to follow these recommendations, it seems like the recommendations are just kind of putting in in our eyes, priority items, what has to be either fixed or pared back, or, I mean, oh, this is fine, it's a recommendation, but the legislation is what's going to come out of these recommendations. Is that not correct? We're not proposing legislation here.
Yeah, I think that's part of the charge.
Really are.
The charge includes any recommended legislation.
Any recommended legislation. We don't have to. We don't have to.
Could I suggest for today that we identify basically the question, and then if we need more, come in. I don't know what the answer is today, but I tend to agree with David that we have all we're going to have. We'll review the findings of the plan and then have a discussion. But you know what I mean? Like today, I think for me, I look at A and I say, okay, we need to have discussion, but we have what we need for that.
We need an agenda item where we will look at the goals and discuss each
Yeah.
of them. Yeah.
But we don't, at this point, I don't feel like we need more testimony or more data on that. Is that a good way for us to come through this now?
Yeah, my comment about BLS intern was coming up with the statistical analysis, et cetera. But I really have no expectation of seeing that.
B, here the second one, examination of changes that have occurred since 1970. I'm not sure we've had that timeline. I don't remember, it's probably somewhere in the notes, but.
I just wanted to point out that there's a very nice list of changes that was included in the history that we gave you last fall in the notebooks from Richard Brooks on all of the various things that have changed. Unfortunately, it only goes up to 93 or something like that, but it gives you a pretty good idea of how many things have changed.
In 250 itself.
Yes.
Right. This is what I consider to be census questions.
Changes in demographics and patterns.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
structures of business knowledge.
That comes up too.
We can do some of that, and some of that was as part of John Adams' conference presentation. So I can see if he still has that. You might also have, there's a national land use data set that 4 months sprawl used for a while that we may be able to update in terms of the amount of developed acreage in the state.
Well, it sounds like it's somebody that might be helpful to kind of pull that together for us if you're willing.
The John Adams presentation, did anyone else?
No, it's not there.
I was there. It was really
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
At what?
At
At the
the
South Wilson.
Planners Conference.
Yeah, no. I was there for part of it, but it was only in the afternoon or something.
Okay, so, DPA, you're offering to take a stab at
I
that
will
first.
talk to them about that,
Thank you.
obviously, but yeah, I can see what we can find.
Revisions plan, Act 47.
really add. Discussion, I mean, plan one-on-one. Right.
What do you say about
In other words, who we should bring in, we should talk about that. That this week, right?
So to answer David's question, so what do you say about climate change in 2050? For one thing, it speaks to transportation. The transportation criteria would be considered, various approaches that encourage the introduction of carbon into the atmosphere and other transportation policies that discourage it. I think it speaks to air pollution, certainly.
Right, we have actually, the subcommittee work was
Yeah.
good on that, but I think what we're saying, in order for the commission to move forward, we need an overview of the plan. Is that right?
I think so. I went into our website and looked under the climate change subcommittee.
Yeah.
The folder's empty.
You know what happened? This is
but-
because the session, the page you pull up is special session, and we tried to bring everything into special session. So it's 2017 to 18 session, and then I said, please just put, because when the public goes, they're not going to know to change session. So we pulled it,
Because the
not
special
stage,
session was different than the 2017-18 session.
and our commission's webpage was set up over 2017-18 session.
Because I obviously spent some time this week reading.
Thank you.
And we're not reading.
We need to.
Can we take care of that? Can we get that, so it's,
Yeah, we
so the public goes looking at it?
need to follow up on that with Faith. Okay, so what I heard is to do C, we're going to have someone do a plan 101. That's going to be Aaron.
Plan 101 is just going
Going through
between
the
noting that, walking you through those findings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Many of the findings is the same thing.
Yes. There are really two sets of things. There were findings from 1970 and 1950 was adopted, and then the plan is a set of findings from 1973. So, sorry if my terminology references are confusing. I would also like to note that in terms of what you say about climate change, I would suggest that there are at least two broad categories. What Senator McCormick mentioned, basically, which I would look at as the emissions from the construction operation and use of the development, including the traffic associated. The other is potentially the ability the resilience in the face of climate change and whether development is prepared for that.
Fluvial erosion, for example.
And then the third is in migration because of sea level rise. It's going to displace 2 million New Englanders by the year 2100. They are becoming, folks.
I won't be here.
So there are at least 3 elements.
Okay, great. Ready for task 2? Revise the criteria with respect to issues emerging since 1970.
And this is where you might, this also talks about climate change as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with again in migration. I mean, it's not in that.
Clean water issues, right?
All right, so what do we need to do to address this one?
my suggestion is, let's see what comes out of our work above. There's no reason that this all has to be original work.
Not at all, but I'm also thinking even the criteria, it would probably make sense to fold the criteria review into the plan 101, so that we know what, at some point, I think Diane took us through the criteria, that was a year ago. So, does that make sense? Settlement patterns in the criteria. Whether the criteria support development in areas designated under 24 VSA, and preserve rural areas, farms, and forests outside those areas.
This is a historic settlement pattern.
Brian, is BNRC's analysis going to include any of this?
Forest fragmentation data doesn't, but the information that Sharon mentioned that we kind of took ownership of with the Absorb Storm Growth Vermont, we've got a lot of data there that I can share with you. That would show changes in the settlement patterns over the decades. Probably in certain parts of the state, not the entire state.
So we can take a look at changes in development patterns since Act 50 went in place in order to answer this, whether the criteria supports the historic development pattern.
I can share.
I mean, if we put at what you present us through that filter, can we ask or draft something with this?
I believe so. Maybe I need to refresh my memory of what we've got. I know there's been some pretty detailed analysis of certain parts of the states and changes in settlement patterns over time that I can share both graphically. I'm not sure.
Okay. We can make up our own minds about whether or not it's working.
Yeah.
John Adams' PowerPoint has information about development within compact centers and outside of compact centers that could help you assess the 76A reference.
So his information might be helpful also.
Yeah, his is based mostly since we've had the designations, I believe. Yeah. I've got some that goes back into the 70s.
Okay, so you'll bring that to us at the next meeting?
Yes, I will try to.
Right. And forest fragmentation.
That is definitely.
And ACCD can forward us John's PowerPoint?
Yep.
But he's probably too swamped with other stuff.
I don't think you can do additional analysis, but you'll have the data, I think, to draw.
Was he able to come and talk about it? I don't know if you want it.
He can talk about his methodology, but I think...
May not be. We think it's self-explanatory.
Okay, I missed that whole conversation.
I'm sorry. I was just asking if we could get that PowerPoint that Chris mentioned and whether it made sense for John had time to come or explain it, or whether, and I don't know if you need it.
I was thinking it sounded like it would be helpful. I was thinking it sounded like it would be helpful for the whole commission to hear this presentation.
Right, so what, only one of us heard it? I have it. Yeah. Well,
He's in national life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounded like you didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't work for ACCD anymore, so...
Is this someone else?
He works for the Agency of Digital Services, so we can't offer you
the agency of
digital services.
He said he created his own agency.
You guys created it.
Yeah. And he's not one of the people formally listed as a partner in this project, so that's...
Madam Chair, motion to designate John Adams as an advisor.
Yeah. Right. Did we use our, we didn't use our...
No, we never, we still have a waste.
We have access to the administration.
Yeah, no, I don't.
That's right.
Hopefully it'll be available.
just released a report on trends and an associated webpage that allows, it's kind of interactive with towns and regions to share a summary of that with you. And it updates some of the earlier data.
We should get going.
I don't know, that was on fragmentation. There's a bundle of information. There's a lot of information.
And I know I have set of notes for myself. I agree that we've got enough documented. I don't have a clue what to do about it. And I would like to suggest that 6 of us are going to sit here next 2 weeks from now and be able to do that. And so, has any of our advisors been working around that issue in terms of changes so that at least we have a point of departure for the conversation?
We have been working with other stakeholders, and I'd also suggest that your committee, the last session, made a lot of progress on what possible solutions might be. And we would suggest that you consider those options.
In 233, I'll be dying the other bottom. Yeah, okay.
Did pass.
Yeah. Then I would ask Aaron, I guess it would be Mike. Who drafted that?
I did.
You did, yeah, all right. All right, so
Would
if
you like
you
me to
could.
bring it in?
Yep, bring it in.
So we have data on that, and then we have proposed ideas how to address it, so that is great. We can discuss it in some future time. Forest products processing permit conditions. We just heard something on this today, I think. What I heard, and actually this is a good time to clarify, I think I heard that Diane had ideas in working with Sam on how to address other concerns.
Well, we're hoping to set up some small stakeholder meetings to have those conversations and work directly to see what we can come up with for solutions.
This is part of the November 1.
No, that's trails.
We need them to do that, so.
Sam, do you want to add something?
Might I ask what you'd like to hear from us to frame up as following Diane's lead on the stakeholder engagement? What types of things are in the comments you've seen, what you've heard from the department, from the NRB, that how can we help inform you with that?
You made a very broad suggestion that it would be important in the industry, if you will, if the legislature would make a gesture and then did not define what you meant by that. I would like to hear a definition of what we could do in very real terms relative to 250. And, just bring it to us. We'll decide whether or not we want to deal with it.
We end up interesting. There was a lot of debate about exempting sawmills if they were small from Act 250, or giving them not a full-blown hearing, but a minor hearing. That passed, and then that whole, did we send that into law?
Yeah, that's the rules out of right. That's right.
Yeah, so, yeah, I think to Representative Dean's point, are there specific Act 250?
Yeah, like that we could respond to. I'm not suggesting bring your shopping list and we'll, validate
concept from it and bring it to you. Is that fine? Is that okay with you? Sure.
Seems to me a lot of these charges to us require evaluation of effectiveness, or like in this case, does it limit, do permit conditions limit the ability to respond to market conditions? I'm not sure who would be capable of analyzing that and making some sort of statement on it.
I think in part, we directed the processors to send comments to you all to kind of speak to some of that from their real life experience. So I think hopefully if you get a chance to read through some of those, they'll tell, at least from an applicant's perspective, how certain conditions have limited their capacity.
I'm willing to do that. What traditionally happens, and it leaves me, is people will describe an experience. And I don't have any idea where the wheels fell off the wagon or what change would keep the wheels on the wagon so the whole process moves forward. And so if you're going to put out a request or inform a larger group, please ask them to take that next step. Here's the problem, here was our experience. This might be a way to approach.
We can do that. I think Sam gave some very specific examples of the difficulty in moving forest products out of the woods under safe frozen or dry conditions and into processing facilities under hours of operation restrictions and trucking restrictions. So that's
right. Let me go further. Here's what I want to hear. We suggest that in those situations where there are weather-driven concerns, that permits allow for limited, specific periods of time the activities necessary to conduct the logging. And by that, we mean if you have a 2-week window, it's a 2-week permit. Do you understand what I'm saying? That, okay, so you've got weather restrictions. So does everybody in Vermont. What do we do about it from the perspective of 250?
We'll get you something before next.
And there's sort of two issues, and David brought up the global milk market driving a lot of our dairy farmers out of business. To me, it's very similar. There's an analogy we made with the forest products industry. And it's difficult to parse out, Act 250 permit conditions. I mean, if the industry were booming, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. There are larger forces at play here. I would actually like to hear suggestions or ideas that are like, there must be another way for us to support the industry. I don't think that, I get the feeling there's more at play here, and that just sort of loosening up restrictions from Act 250, it's not going to solve their problems. Sam?
Thank you. To get to Representative Dean's point and your thoughts on this, to elaborate about adjusters, the issue is that these aren't people who can't sleep at night or don't have good home lives. This is the logistical needs of this business is very similar to agriculture. They have to make hay when the sun shines. And to work at night, they have to have operational flexibility to be out there at nights, weekends, holidays, things like that. That's one of those things that the disconnect between society and working lands produced commodities, how as we all become removed from these businesses, we don't necessarily, it becomes an inconvenience rather than an understanding that, oh, I understand why they're hauling logs tonight or why they're doing this. It's because they're doing it on the conditions that needs to be done. And I'm sorry I'm not being more articulate than that, but that's what I'm talking about with the gesture, is in terms of understanding and finding within the appropriate confines, as you've described, a way to say, we can permit these businesses and make this work. We understand that you have some unique challenges that are related to not building gravel roads into the woods when you can drive on frozen sod, when you can drive on dry sod versus gravel or stoning roads up in the woods, things like that. Just, I'm trying to be as concise as I can.
We'll continue the conversation, please, just be specific.
Diane, when do you think that you would have those conversations be completed by?
I really don't know. I mean, hopefully sometime in November, so. You're going to schedule some more meetings in November?
No.
We'll leave today.
You're all done?
We are definitely going to have meetings in November.
Okay, so.
I was saying you off to write right
Yeah, I thought you were too. Go right.
now. Okay. I know what I'd write, but I wouldn't know what you'd write.
I can write what you want, and we'll decide if you got it right.
Sam,
Okay.
are you, I guess what I'm a little confused about, this conversation's been going on a long time. And so do we need a new one, or are you prepared to come to us with ideas?
What was the last word you said?
Ideas.
Ideas.
Are you prepared, I mean, I guess I do feel like we've been, all last session we talked about this, we've had it all summer, and now I'm hearing another conversation with stakeholders.
I know, it's not another one. It's the beginning of it. Okay, what you have now are comments that came directly to you from some of those same stakeholders, which was one mechanism to help you understand the issues. What we're talking about is in the greater universe of trying to work with specific businesses and specific issues is to sit down with those stakeholders and have that conversation directly and see if we can get to the very specific things that Representative Dean was referring to.
Okay, so we need to.
Okay, as long as we've got you on that agenda. I used to be a SEAL.
Our homework is to read the comments and look forward to your input on it.
Well, and that's where my request came from reading those comments. Okay, we got this problem. What the hell do I do about it?
All right, task group 3. Revising jurisdiction to achieve goals.
Well, this is for
So this is about jurisdiction criteria.
I don't settle with that.
Two people were talking about it.
I just want to make sure it's clear, this is about jurisdiction rather than criteria. So H233, for example, added criteria about forest loss and habitat connectivity, did not change jurisdiction. So even though it may seem like it's similar to the same topic, it's sort of different lens.
Yes, thank you.
This is the idea of lifting jurisdictions. Taking an Act 250 permit off a piece of land.
No, this is.
That is one of the things on the list, but you haven't got there yet.
Let's see.
Do we need to, I'm looking at one, but promotes compact centers of mixed use. I have opinions about that, but I'm wondering, is there a data set that we have that we should dust off, or?
Well, I think we go back to what the data said in the earlier discussion, but maybe look at it through different lens and say, okay, if you are going to do, you're going to drive more than 5% of development outside of the historic pattern, boom, 250. I think that's,
So we already have it.
well, we're going to have some of the data.
You're going to have, I think you're going to have some data, and I think John Adams is going to have data. What's going to be a challenge is the kind of the causation. What's the role of Act 250 in this? John's data, I think, you could probably attribute a certain amount of the development in downtowns or centers to downtown programs and other state incentive programs.
And if I get it, we only have housing data, and a lot of the housing starts are going to be sub-jurisdiction, so it's hard to, to show that Act 250 is playing a role in the development that's occurring, because so much of the development is sub-jurisdiction. So we can give you the data, but just recognize that it has no nexus really to Act 250.
And the downtown designations, those are also pretty new, right? So
Yeah, I mean, they've been on the books since 2000 in iterations over time.
So it might be a full discussion about that. Right. So we're not going to have like, yes, it is enhanced by 12.3%. Right. But okay, so what we have basically we'll get.
I thought another consideration is the Housing and Conservation Fund has been around now for 30 years. That's probably done more to drive housing into our town centers than anything in the state's history, because they've been very attentive to this kind of smart growth locations.
And also this advances to another item, but the priority housing project exemption has done a lot to encourage more housing within centers as well. So if you're talking about jurisdiction. Stuff on that. I bet they don't.
Protecting important natural resources. There are actually
I'll get you that.
the type and scale of
I have,
development
actually.
adequate
I read it.
protection for important natural resources as defined in 24 days.
Yeah, I can update it.
2791, what's that section?
Sorry.
For important natural resources as defined in 24.
That's part of the downtown development chapter. You probably get to it and need it to you. Is that what you'd like me to do? It's not that long. But, taking over.
Yeah, so let's at least have the language.
Do you want me just to bring it? Are you asking what is it right now?
Yeah, 10 words or less.
It's not, I don't think it's that long. It actually refers back to Act 250. It's the most pithy definition of natural resources I'm aware of in the statute. Okay. Important natural resources means headwaters, streams, shorelines, floodways, rare and irreplaceable natural areas, necessary wildlife habitat, wetlands, endangered species, productive forest lands, and primary agricultural soils, all of which are as defined in 10 VSA Chapter 151, which is the chapter that is Act 250.
So obviously 250 does apply. It's still one word answer.
Well, no, it's whether the jurisdictional triggers are adequate to protect these resources. It's, of course, when Act 250 applies, it looks at these resources. But the question, as I understood what was being asked, was, is the jurisdiction appropriately focused to protect these resources? It's really kind of a recommendation and discussion thing, probably. Yeah.
Did you lead that discussion?
I guess I tried. I mean,
No, I'm serious. Just so that we have a proctor in terms of keeping us 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 15 minutes.
All right, B, exemptions.
Chair Snelling say that was in the binder, the list of exemptions.
Aaron prepared that for us.
Actually, Ellen did. It's come back.
Oh.
That's the fall. Ellen Tchaikovsky started back with us.
Yeah, welcome back.
In the back of the room. And yes, there is a whole, no.
That's just a question.
And that's website, you filed it as on 250. The commission's website.
It is on the commission's website.
Okay, so we have what we need the next of March.
Do you have a list of exemptions?
Yep.
Yes.
So I was
Do we want to march through it together?
Good work.
Ridge lines, was that,
Before, when we do exemptions, the other thing is that I think we wanted to look at why certain exemptions are granted. Because of a particular nature or something that really doesn't lend itself to review, or are there exemptions there as rewards or incentives? Philosophically, I don't like the idea of using exemptions as an incentive. It sort of implies that like not being under Act 50 is a good thing. Being reviewed as bad.
No, I think when we work our way through it, you know, we'll get that, because if I remember, it's a full explanation.
all right, and then ridge lines.
sort of similar, right?
Is this also something that you can,
All can be used.
all right?
Yeah, the release from jurisdiction, we've heard a lot about that. It does strike me as something that we're going to have an opinion about.
I think the history of the board next came up a lot with forums I attended. I mean, forums, I kept on hearing that a lot.
And in the legislation that you had drafted, David, did you address some of those circumstances?
Well, let me ask this, do we need more for this? Or can we just have a discussion on this?
Fine, I'll give you that question.
Yeah,
The question?
Yeah.
Well, so David introduced legislation to deal with this issue, and I just asked if there were suggestions already in that, there must be under circumstances, under which.
yeah, we'll try and pull that.
Pull that out.
Is that a number, David? Is that building a number?
Yes.
It did have a number.
Did that.
I will find it.
All right, projects in multiple towns. Again, I think, I want to say, I was in the room when all these conversations happened, so we heard about this stuff.
Right, but we have what we need for this, right? We just need to have a discussion.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great. Trails, we have what we need.
I think so.
Okay.
Well, with Greg's data, it's going to provide us.
Right. Task group 4.
Task Group 4, active process interface with other permit appeals. Application and review process between the district commission role and the natural resources board. Statistical analysis, we're meeting on that this week or next week? Monday. So coming soon. Evaluation of how well we act, application review appeals processes are serving Vermonters and the state's environment, and how they can be improved.
So
This comes out. Yeah, this comes out. This comes out. The response to this comes out of the COPE report and the survey. The public hearing survey. I think it's really good.
The interface, I think this is an important one. It's another pretty specific thing that's come up a lot, A&R permits.
Don't we, didn't you do a summary for us in terms of the word just fell on my deference to permits or
I don't recall.
presumptions about?
I'm working, actually, one of the things that I've been working on is a memo to you about the legal issues around this interface, including presumptions. So you'll have that.
Okay.
If you want it.
Within time, we'll have it. Yeah.
When do you need it? It's almost done.
So, Aaron,
So basically, I'm looking at cases that talk about the authority of Act 250 vis-a-vis other agency permits, and also, what is a presumption, and what's the difference between a rebuttable and a conclusive presumption, which is part of this. I'm not looking at. I haven't been examining the relationship of the scope, criteria, and procedures of Act 250 with all of the other permitting processes. That's not something I have been doing. That's pretty big. So I have some of this.
we have already followed this chart. Which,
well, you have other.
Yeah, I think we presented on the NRDC permits and made some recommendations about opportunities to, rely more on some of the state permits in the activity process. So we can revise that.
so I think that would be helpful for us to have our conversation.
So, the appeals.
The appeals, I think is going to be a hard discussion, but I think we have what we need. So, appeals.
Yeah, the whole question of de novo.
Yeah, it's hard, but I don't know what you.
Right, I agree. We can have a work and file and then have the conversation.
This is tricky.
Misuse of opportunity to participate or appeal.
This was
Added.
I just don't know how we measure it, but.
Is that like anecdotal or is there a
Yeah,
problem?
you apply for party status, reject, and then $83,000
To go away.
You go away.
It doesn't happen.
I mean, there's
The claims are made.
cases that see this would happen.
I guess we don't know.
I guess
But I don't know how we look into it. That's the problem.
I also, I think this covers, the Little Oil Valley folks. I learned in a conversation yesterday with someone about that. They said that we had this rail trail, every landowner but one agreed to it, and they held it up. So I think this topic also covers, how to deal with that.
Yeah, that was very much a part of the alcohol discussion.
Yeah.
That got held up.
But, the kind of opportunity for one disgruntled person when there's a large consensus degrees, and how do we want to deal with that?
I recall Peter Gill, when he was working for Act 250, testifying on this issue.
Who?
Former counsel with Act 250 who used to work with Greg. I know he came in and testified either, it may have been this commission or one of the Natural Resources committees, whether they found it, whether he could see any evidence of this. I'm looking at Greg because I know Peter's not around anymore.
Right. I mean, I'm still in touch with him, but I don't recall this particular testimony, but I'm happy to talk with him further to see if we address.
Can we get in touch with them and just ask the question? I mean, do we not get in touch with them?
Well, yeah. And I'm happy to testify as well. If you could refine, if I understand exactly what the question is, I'm happy to look into it and talk.
Well, what I recall is any applications in which the underlying problem could be discerned based on the review of the case. So, an offer to withdraw a person's opposition or appeal in return for payment or other consideration is unrelated to the impact of the project. He wasn't able to find anything. Now, that could be because it all happened outside of, if it happened outside of.
It's a delay now, right?
So, right, and I guess the question is, how do we address this part of this task? Anyone?
But you can just explain how difficult it is to find facts that support it.
If I understand the question correctly, this is a problem I would imagine is not, it's probably found in all areas of the law and not specifically to Act 250. I mean, this is
Slap sins.
exactly. Unfortunately, it's a common problem, and it's very, very hard to resolve. And no matter what no matter what area of law you're talking about, it's very hard to resolve.
Okay. Wow, we're into appendix.
Okay, good.
I had mine out, so I think.
Thank you all for persevering.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So can you just,
Yes.
are you doing a phone call meeting?
I think we just did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for asking. I think everyone needs to review everything. It's not a way. Everyone needs to review everything. It's not a way. I wonder when I was in the meeting, we already have a table.
Some of them are saying, we have information. Well, I mean, on this jurisdiction, stormwater administration. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'll just get you what I some information, but it's best available. Again, it's all so much development sub-jurisdictions and specific pathways. And, well, I mean, there's very limited. You'd say, okay, we've got existing settlements. Reduce active jurisdiction there. Instead of, maybe not. Guess what? Five lots outside of it. I mean, it has to be the package of reducing and tagging the jurisdiction. That's why. I could write some articles. But I think, this is what the NRC figures out. Where you find something that's collaborative. Could be other advisors would be nice. We're all here.
Hold on, public comment period right now. They're reconvening. They made a mistake, they forgot the public comment.
Excuse me, everyone, I'm really sorry. I was just reminded that we skipped the last agenda item, which was public comment, and there is a member of the public who wishes to comment. So we're going to reconvene for them.
Hello. Hold on a second. Let her get the record started.
name is Bruce Post. I'm a citizen, environmental historian, interested in this process, watched it for a long time. When Beth Humstone testified, it made me realize that I am probably the last person to hold the office of director of the office, the state planning office. It was called the Office of Planning, Research, and Coordination under Governor Snelling. I got let go after Governor Snelling died, and I think they got rid of the office. So I feel like a relic. Yeah, I feel like a relic. I understand what the last passenger pigeon must have felt like. But I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, when someone retires, they often get a gold watch. I obviously didn't get one. I got a boot in the butt at my last job when I left. But it's rare that when someone retires, they leave a great gift to their employer. And Representative Dean, I was here when you mentioned public trust resources. I haven't heard much talk of it lately. I hope that the committee is able to pursue and define what that is, because I think it could be an important addition to the way we look at the ecology of a mountain state. And there are a number of components to it, but you talked about ridge lines. I'm going to speak up for the mountains because they are the most characteristic feature of this state. They're not mentioned much in Act 250. Richard Brooks made that clear, and I hope you'll make some mention of it. And I hope it can be an emphasis, and also ecosystem analysis. I think that's important too. And I think that could be a great and deserved legacy for you. And that's not the only reason to do it, though. Secondly, I think there's been an attempt, I sense it, to shoehorn economic development on top of Act 250, which I consider to be an environmental planning law. I've looked at what Dean Davis had to say about that stuff, but the best source I got was the Dalai Lama, believe it or not, and he doesn't know about Act 250, but he talked about someone saying they could be a Christian Buddhist, that there are some things that just don't combine well, and he used a graphic analogy that it's like putting a yak's head on a sheep's body. And I hope you'll keep that in mind when you get more and more of these calls that, Act 250 has to reflect economic development much more than it has, and I hope you'll resist that. And just one little thing I'd like to read, I think it's valid. This is from the April 22nd, 1995 Burlington Free Press. The headline is Warning Casts Shadow on Law's Anniversary. There was a big celebration here on the State House grounds for the 25th anniversary of Act 250, sponsored by the NRC and Ben & Jerry's and Business for Social Responsibility. And they interviewed one guy who said, people give more lip service to the environment than ever before, but the reality is that step by step we are retreating from our commitment to protect it. I think those words are still valid today. They have a picture of the guy that said it. He was rather roguish looking, pretty debonair, sort of like a Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, and Senator Corbett might want to see what you looked like in those days. I've been hanging on to that thing for months, hoping for the proper opportunity, and I don't know if you feel that way today, but I certainly do. And then regarding John Adams and his presentation on maps, on the day Donald Trump came to Vermont as a candidate, January 8th, I think 2016, I interviewed Peter Martin, who was then the president of CAX. He was Dean Davis's executive assistant in his second term, and he was an enforcer. And I asked him why the statewide land use plan didn't pass. And he said, well, one, farmers were losing their farms, they wanted to sell their land. The other reason why is we had hardly any mapping capability. Well, we have that capability today. It's only a tool. It's only a tool. But not having that capability is no longer an excuse. What we lack, perhaps, is the will to have a really comprehensive look at this state from an ecosystem perspective, which I think our environmental law should be about, and not economic development. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry to keep you.
No, that was